Imagine this. You're finally settled in your hard-earned VIP seat, ready to enjoy the experience you've been looking forward to for weeks. You worked late nights, saved up, and made the decision to treat yourself because, frankly, you deserved it. But just as you're adjusting the seatbelt, a flight attendant walks over with an expression that's almost apologetic. Almost then comes the line, "We need you to switch seats for someone else." At first you think, could this be a simple misunderstanding? That's exactly what Elisha thought. But as the situation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't about logistics policies or even a mistake. It was about something much deeper, something much uglier. Why was she targeted? Who made the request? And why did they think they could get away with it? Most importantly, how did this moment of blatant discrimination snowball into a reckoning that ended with an entire team being fired? This isn't just a story. It's a powerful lesson in standing up for what's right, demanding accountability, and making your voice heard. Let me introduce you to Elisha. She's not just anyone. Elisha is a self-made success story, a corporate executive who has worked tirelessly to build her career from the ground up. She's the kind of woman who knows her worth and isn't afraid to fight for it, no matter the obstacles in her way. This trip wasn't just a vacation for Elisha. It was a celebration on a moment to breathe, reflect, and enjoy the fruits of her labor. Upgrading to a VIP seat wasn't about showing off or indulging in luxury. It was about rewarding herself for her dedication, her late nights, and her countless sacrifices. She wanted comfort, she wanted peace, and most importantly, she wanted what she had paid for. When Elisha arrived at the airport that morning, everything seemed to fall into place perfectly. Her sharp outfit and poised demeanor turned heads as she walked through the terminal. She breathed through security, checked into the VIP lounge, and allowed herself a moment to savor the anticipation of a well-earned trip. Everything about the day felt right, until she boarded the plane. Elisha's seat was exactly what she had envisioned, spacious, comfortable, and tucked away in the quiet VIP section. She stowed her carry-on, adjusted her seatbelt, and began mentally preparing for the relaxing journey ahead. But then out of nowhere, a flight attendant appeared at her side. Her smile was polite, but there was an edge to her tone. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said. "We're going to need you to switch seats at first. Alicia thought there must be some kind of mistake." "I'm sorry," she replied, her tone calm but firm. She double-checked her ticket, holding it up as if to confirm her own memory. "This is my seat. Is there an issue?" The flight attendant hesitated for a moment, but then her polite smile faltered. "No issue," she said, her voice clipped. "It's just that we have another passenger who needs this seat for a brief second." Elisha considered whether the request might be reasonable. Perhaps the passenger had a legitimate need, a disability, a medical condition, or something urgent. But as she glanced up, she saw the truth. The other passenger, who was already hovering nearby, was neither elderly nor disabled. He was a white man in a business suit, exuding an air of entitlement so thick it could choke the room. This wasn't about necessity. This was about privilege. Alicia's pulse quickened, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she stayed calm. "I'm sorry," she said again, "but I paid for this seat. I'm not moving." The flight attendant demeanor shifted immediately. The polite veneer melted away, replaced by frustration. "We're asking you to cooperate," she said, her tone sharp. "Now it's just a seat." Elisha didn't flinch. "It's not just a seat," she replied firmly. "It's the seat I paid for. If there's a reason I need to move, I'd like to hear it." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers were starting to notice the exchange, their heads turning to watch the drama unfold. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces were sympathetic, nodding slightly in Alicia's direction. Others were carefully neutral, unwilling to take a side. And then there were the few who looked outright annoyed, not at the situation, but at Alicia herself, as though her refusal to comply was somehow an inconvenience to everyone else. For Alicia, this moment was about more than a seat. It was about principle. It was about dignity. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to be pushed aside like this. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. As the murmurs grew louder, Alicia could feel the weight of their gazes, but she remained steady. This wasn't her first encounter with injustice, and it likely wouldn't be her last. Her resolve only strengthened with each passing second. If she caved now, what kind of message would that send to herself, to the flight crew, to the other passengers who were watching? What followed was a moment that would ignite a storm of events, a cascade of actions that would shake this airline to its core. But before we dive into that, let's unpack what really happened here. How did Alicia handle the situation? What steps did she take to ensure her voice was heard? And how did this seemingly small act of discrimination lead to an entire corporate team being held accountable? Stick around, because this story is about to take some twists and turns you won't see coming. As the flight attendant stood firm in her demand, Alicia realized she was at a crossroads. She could comply, relinquishing her seat to avoid further escalation, or she could stand her ground, knowing that doing so might provoke a larger confrontation for Alicia. The choice was clear. "I'm not moving," she said, her voice steady. "If there's a legitimate reason for this request, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I'm staying right here." The attendant expression darkened clearly. She hadn't expected resistance, ma'am. She began again, her tone sharper. "Now, this is a matter of convenience. The other passenger paid for their seat, just like I did." Alicia interrupted, finishing the sentence. "For her convenience doesn't justify asking someone to give up what they've rightfully purchased." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made others in the VIP section turn their heads. By now, the tension had drawn the attention of several passengers. A middle-aged woman across the aisle leaned forward, her face etched with concern. "She's right," the woman said quietly, addressing the flight attendant. "This doesn't seem fair." The murmurs began spreading like wildfire. The passengers closest to the scene exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement with Alicia, while others whispered among themselves, casting glances of irritation not at the airline but at Alicia. "I paid for my ticket too, and this whole thing is slowing us down," muttered a man a few rows back, shaking his head. Alicia appreciated the support report from the woman across the aisle, but the flight attendant seemed undeterred. "We asking for cooperation," she repeated, as though the sheer repetition would change Alicia's mind. "The other passenger has a very tight connection, and so do I." Alicia shot back. "In fact, I upgraded to the seat precisely because I needed the extra space and comfort for my connecting flight. I'm sorry, but my needs aren't less important." It was then that the other passenger, the white man in the business suit, decided to chime in. His voice was clipped and dripping with entitlement. "This is ridiculous," he said, glaring at Alicia. "It's just a seat. You're being unreasonable." Alicia turned to face him, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I paid for this seat just as you paid for yours," she said. "If it's just a seat, why don't you take the one assigned to you?" The man's face flushed. He opened his mouth to retort, but stopped as another passenger, a younger man seated behind Alicia, interjected. "She's got a point," he said loudly enough for the whole section to hear. "If you want a VIP seat, pay for one, like everyone else." The man in the suit turned and shot a glare at the younger man, who raised his hands and mocked surrender, but smirked slightly. Alicia saw the tension ripple across the cabin as more passengers began muttering among themselves, some agreeing with her, others clearly wishing the scene would end. The flight attendant, sensing that she was losing control of the situation, stepped back and gestured toward the front of the plane. "I'll be right back," she said curtly, before walking away for a moment. Alicia allowed herself to breathe. She could feel the stares of the other passengers, some sympathetic, others indifferent. A few, however, sided with the man in the suit, their expressions a mix of annoyance and disapproval. Alicia caught snippets of their murmured conversations. "Why doesn't she just move?" one woman whispered to her seatmate. It's not a big deal. Alicia clenched her hands in her lap. The urge to simply give in and make the discomfort go away was strong, but she resisted. She thought about all the time she'd been asked, expected to shrink herself to make space, for others to accept less than she deserved, simply because it was more convenient for someone else. Not today, she thought. Not this time. That was bold, said the woman across the aisle, offering Alicia a small smile. Good for you. Alicia nodded, but she didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired of always having to prove herself to defend her right to exist in spaces she'd earned, but she also felt resolute. This wasn't just about a seat, it was about standing up for herself and refusing to be treated as less than when the flight attendant returned. She wasn't alone. A supervisor, a middle-aged man with a clipped demeanor, followed closely behind his forced smile, did little to mask the irritation in his eyes as he approached Alicia. Ma'am. He began, We understand there's been some confusion. Let's see if we can resolve this amicably. There's no confusion, Alicia replied evenly. I paid for this seat. I'm not moving. The supervisor's smile tightened, and his tone became more measured, though no less condescending. I understand your perspective, but we're asking for your cooperation. The other passenger has certain priorities, and his priorities don't. Trump mine? Alicia interrupted. I've made it clear I'm not moving. The supervisor's face hardened. If you refuse to cooperate, we may have to involve security, he said. Alicia's heart pounded, but she didn't. Flinch, go ahead, she said. In fact, I'd like to speak with them myself. I want it on record that I'm being asked to relinquish a seat I paid for without any legitimate reason. This statement seemed to catch the supervisor off guard. He glanced at the flight attendant, who shifted uncomfortably. There's no need to escalate this further, the supervisor said, his tone now tinged with frustration. We're simply trying to accommodate. You're trying to accommodate him at my expense, Alicia said, gesturing toward the man in the suit. If that's the airline's policy, I'd like it in writing. Otherwise, I'm staying right here. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. A man 2 rows back chimed in, his voice tinged with irritation. Why is this taking so long? Just let her keep her seat and move on. Another voice, louder and sharper, cut through the air. This is outrageous. This airline should be ashamed. The comment came from an elderly woman seated near the front of the VIP section. Her words drew a smattering of applause from a few passengers. While others continued to murmur among themselves, the supervisor sighed heavily. I'll need to consult with the captain, he said. Finally, please remain seated while we resolve this. As he walked away, Alicia exhaled, her hands gripping the armrests of her seat. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her, but she refused to show any sign of fear or uncertainty. She was determined to see this through no matter the outcome. As the plane touched down, Al's resolve hadn't wavered, but her exhaustion was evident. She had won the battle on board, but she knew this wasn't over. The entire experience was seared into her mind, each word and gesture replaying in vivid detail. It was time to take action, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been in her shoes after disembarking. Alicia didn't hesitate. She found a quiet corner in the terminal, her suitcase parked beside her, and dialed the airline's corporate customer service number. The hold music was grating, but it gave her a moment to collect her thoughts. She wasn't angry. She was measured, deliberate. This wasn't about venting frustration, it was about accountability. Thank you for calling customer service. How may I assist you today? The representative chirped, their voice detached and professional. I need to escalate an incident that occurred on my flight. Alicia began. It involves discriminatory behavior from your staff, and I need to speak with someone in a supervisory position. The representative paused, the upbeat tone faltering slightly. I'm sorry to hear about that. Could you provide some details about the incident? Alicia recounted the events clearly and concisely, careful to emphasize the facts. She left no room for ambiguity, detailing how she had been asked to vacate her paid VIP seat, the entitlement of the other passenger, and the threats of security in involvement when she stood her ground. This isn't just poor service, she concluded, it's discrimination. The representative responses became increasingly generic. I understand your frustration. I'll file a report and ensure this is escalated. That's not enough, Alicia interjected firmly. I want a direct response from your corporate office, and let me make this clear. If I don't hear back, I won't hesitate to take this public. Her tone left no doubt. The representative, likely sensing the seriousness of the situation, promised that a report would be sent to their higher-ups immediately. But Alicia wasn't one to leave things to chance. As soon as she ended the call, she opened her phone and began drafting a post for her social media accounts. Alicia knew the power of storytelling, especially in an age where a single viral post could topple corporations. That evening she composed a detailed account of her experience. She included every relevant detail: the flight number, the staff's behavior, the other passenger's entitlement. She kept the tone factual but unapologetically firm, ending with a poignant statement. This is the reality for Black travelers, even in spaces we've paid to occupy. Enough is enough. Within hours, her post began to gain traction. Comments flooded in, some from people who had witnessed similar incidents, others expressing outrage on her behalf. Stories of discrimination poured in from other travelers. A man denied boarding because he looked suspicious. A family separated from their seats due to an error that magically didn't affect anyone else. The floodgates had opened by morning. Alicia's story had been shared thousands of times. The hashtags Flying Wild Black and Traveling Wild Black began trending across platforms. Influencers and advocacy groups picked it up, amplifying the message further. Alicia's inbox overflowed with messages of support, media inquiries, and most notably, screenshots of others vowing to boycott the airline until justice was served. Social media users unleashed their fury on the airline's official accounts. Posts demanding accountability were accompanied by screenshots of Alicia's viral story. One particularly scathing comment read, "So you're telling me a Black woman can't even sit in a seat she paid for without being harassed?" Do better memes began circulating with captions like "airline policy, VIP or very intimidating passenger. If you're Black and upgrade your racism today." Influencers with millions of followers joined the conversation, tagging the airline and demanding change. Videos dissecting the incident garnered millions of views, further amplifying the pressure. Within hours, media outlets picked up the story. Headlines ranged from "airline faces racism allegations after VIP seat incident" to "Black traveler takes a stand against discrimination." Alicia, inundated with interview requests, chose her words carefully. She wasn't seeking revenge, as she was seeking change. "This isn't about me," she told one reporter. "It's about a systemic issue. This is the kind of behavior people like me face every day in countless industries. I'm just not willing to accept it anymore." Television segments debated the implications of Alicia's story, with panelists discussing the broader issue of systemic racism in travel, and customer service advocacy organizations called for boycotts, while public petitions demanding the airline issue. A formal apology garnered tens of thousands of signatures within days. Meanwhile, the airline's leadership scrambled to contain the fallout. Internally, frantic emails and meetings consumed the corporate office. Public relations experts were brought in to mitigate the damage, but the initial response only added fuel to the fire. Alicia received an email from the airline's corporate office. The tone was defensive, the wording careful. "We regret to hear about your experience and are committed to providing all passengers with the utmost respect and fairness. We are investigating the matter and will respond shortly." The response fell flat. Social media users quickly dissected the email, pointing out its lack of accountability and sincerity. Comments like, "This isn't an apology, it's damage control," and "they're more worried about their image than fixing the problem," flooded the airlines. Pages. The airline's attempt to plate the situation backfired spectacularly. The team released a follow-up statement promising a comprehensive review and enhanced sensitivity training for all staff, but it wasn't enough to contain the growing outrage. The public demanded tangible actions, reparations, firings, and most of all, an acknowledgement of systemic issues within the company. The CEO, initially silent, eventually appeared in a brief interview. "We are deeply sorry for the incident and take these allegations seriously," he said, but his expression betrayed discomfort. Critics were quick to point out the lack of concrete steps outlined in his response. "Sorry isn't enough when this keeps happening." One commenter wrote, "The boardroom at the airline's corporate headquarters had never felt more suffocating." The conference table, usually surrounded by executives in crisp suits, discussing quarterly profits, was now the center of a heated debate. A giant screen displayed trending hashtags, "Reform the airlines flying wild black," and "accountability." Now, every few seconds, new notifications pinged into the company's social media monitoring software, each one amplifying the crisis. "This is spiraling out of control," said the chief operating officer, wiping his brow. "We need immediate action." The CEO leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "We're beyond immediate action," he said grimly. "We're in damage control." But Alicia wasn't interested in their damage control, as these executives scrambled to protect their reputations. She was already 3 steps ahead. Her focus wasn't on punishing individual, it was on dismantling a culture of discrimination and setting a precedent for real change. The Lynn's internal investigation started with the usual corporate playbook interviews, paperwork, and damage assessments. HR staff sat across from the flight attendant involved in the incident, whose defensiveness was palpable. "I was just following orders," she said. Her voice strained. "The supervisor told me to handle it. What was I supposed to do?" But the records told a different story. Complaints about her behavior toward passengers of color had been filed before each one dismissed, with view justifications she was under stress. The passengers were uncooperative. This time there would be no dismissals. The scrutiny was too intense. The supervisor, meanwhile, was resolute in their version of events. "Look," they said, their tone clipped. She refused to cooperate. "We couldn't delay the entire flight over one passenger. I did what I had to do." Their combative stance quickly unraveled when testimonies from other crew members painted a picture of favorite M and bias. "It's not the first time I've seen something like this," one crew member admitted under anonymity, "but we all know better than to speak up. It's not worth the risk," as the investigation unfolded behind closed doors. The public's fury only grew on social media. Stories of similar incidents poured in like a flood. A black father shared how he had been asked to prove his first-class ticket was his own. A young woman described being moved from her as assigned seat for operational reasons, only to find the new seat had been double-booked. Rallies were organized at airports in major cities. Protesters held signs reading "No room for racism in the skies," and "Seats shouldn't come with strings." Advocacy groups demanded not only accountability for the incident, but also sweeping industry-wide reforms. "This isn't just one bad apple," said a spokesperson for a civil rights organization during a press conference. "This is a systemic problem, and we won't rest until the entire orchard is examined for Alicia." The wave of support was overwhelming but invigorating. She fielded calls from journalists, activists, and even corporate leaders from other industries who wanted her perspective. Every interview was an opportunity to push the narrative. Beyond her personal experience, "I'm not here to ruin lives," she said during a live-streamed panel discussion. "I'm here to make sure no one else has to go through what I did," but privately, Alicia knew the fight was far from over. The airlines, initial promises, investigations, suspensions, vague policy reviews weren't enough. She pressed forward, leveraging her platform to demand transparency in the investigation and concrete action from the airline under pressure from Alicia and the public. The airline released the results of its investigation. The findings were damning. Not only had the staff involved acted inappropriately, but the company internal policies had also failed to provide adequate safeguards against such incidents. The consequences were swift. The flight attendant and supervisor were terminated, but this wasn't enough to satisfy the public's demands. The airline CEO issued a statement admitting for the first time that the company's culture needed a complete overhaul. "We take full responsibility. The statement read, "This incident has shown us that we have much work to do to ensure our values are reflected in every aspect of our operations. Mandatory bias training. All employees from baggage handlers to seat executives would undergo annual sensitivity and anti-discrimination training. Independent Oversight Board, a third-party committee, would handle complaints of discrimination, ensuring impartiality and accountability. Passenger rights. Charter a new policy guaranteeing equal treatment for all customers with clear escalation procedures for grievances." Alicia wasn't entirely satisfied. "Policies are a good start," she told a reporter, "but accountability has to be ongoing. This isn't a one-and-done fix." The changes at the airlines sparked a broader movement across the industry. Competing airlines announced similar initiatives, eager to avoid becoming the next target of public scrutiny. Advocacy groups pushed for federal regulations to standardize anti-discrimination policies across all airlines. Congress even held hearings with Alicia, invited to testify. "This isn't just about flying," Alicia said in her testimony. "It's about ensuring that dignity and respect aren't luxuries. Their rights." Her words resonated beyond the hearing room. Alicia's story became a case study in corporate ethics programs and a rallying cry for marginalized communities. Employers across industries began re-examining their own practices, from hiring and training to customer interactions, months after the incident. Alicia stood on a stage at a national leadership conference. The applause was deafening as she approached the podium, but her expression remained calm, focused. She spoke not about the incident itself, but about what it represented. "We can't change the past," she said, her voice steady, "but we can shape the future. It takes courage to stand up to say this isn't right, but that courage can create ripples that change entire systems." Her story wasn't just a headline anymore. It was a movement as the dust began to settle. The aftermath of the incident revealed more than just the airline's failure. Z showcased the power of persistence, solidarity, and collective voices demanding change for Alicia. The resolution wasn't about personal vindication. It was about creating a pathway for others who might one day face similar injustices. In the months following the incident, the airline took visible steps to rebuild its reputation. Press releases detailed reform after reform, signaling their commitment to change. Employee training programs were rolled out nationwide, not just covering bias awareness, but also conflict resolution and empathy in customer service. Videos from these sessions showed employees engaged in group discussions, role-playing scenarios, and confronting their own biases. "It's about time," one employee wrote on social media, sharing a selfie at a training session. "This is work we should have been doing years ago." The newly formed Independent Oversight Board began its operations with rigorous standards. By the end of its first quarter, the board reported having reopened 17 previously dismissed cases of discrimination. Among these were passengers who, like Alicia, had been displaced or treated unfairly under the guise of policy enforcement. One passenger, a retired teacher, shared her gratitude on social media. "I finally feel heard. I never thought anyone would care about what happened to me." The airline also unveiled a bold initiative, a scholarship program for aspiring aviation professionals from underrepresented communities. The program's launch event featured testimonials from young pilots and crew members who spoke about the barriers they had faced for the airline. This was an investment in the future, a way to ensure their workforce reflected the diversity of their passengers. While these moves garnered praise, skepticism lingered. Critics argued that such gestures often fade over time, especially without sustained accountability. Alicia herself voiced cautious optimism. "This is a step forward, but the question isn't whether they can start, it's whether they can keep going." For Alicia, the resolution was bittersweet. While the tangible changes were encouraging, the emotional toll of the journey couldn't be ignored. Late at night, when the headlines and hashtags faded, she often found herself reflecting on the weight of what had happened. "It's hard to celebrate progress when the cost is so personal," she confided to a close friend during a quiet moment. "But if my experience can spare even one person from going through the same thing, then it's worth it." Alicia didn't stop at reflection. She partnered with civil rights organizations to launch a national campaign aimed at empowering individuals to document and report discrimination. The campaign's tagline, "Your voice, your power," became a rallying cry resonating with millions online workshops, downloadable guides, and even an app for documenting incidents became tools for empowerment, making it easier for people to stand up for themselves. Her advocacy work extended into writing. Alicia began work on a book blending her personal experiences with a broader exploration of systemic inequities in travel and beyond. The book seating arrangements, How to Fight for the Space You Deserve, quickly became a bestseller, praised for its candid storytelling and actionable insights. The ripple effects of the incident extended far beyond the airline corporations. In every sector began reevaluating their policies, driven by a new understanding in an interconnected world. Injustices could no longer be swept under the rug. "This isn't just a wake-up call for airlines," said a corporate ethics consultant during a panel discussion. "This is a wake-up call for everyone. If your policies aren't built on equity, they're built to fail." Discussions about racial bias and customer service took center stage, with experts dissecting everything from how frontline workers are trained to the role of corporate leadership in fostering inclusive cultures. Advocacy groups seized the moment to push for broader changes. Campaigns like Equity and Service gained traction, advocating for national standards to prevent discrimination in all customer-facing industries. Public testimonies flooded social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram, became virtual town halls where marginalized voices found solidarity and strength. One particularly moving post came from a woman who shared, "I used to stay quiet because I thought no one would listen. Alicia's story reminded me that our voices matter." Even Congress took notice. Lawmakers proposed legislation aimed at regulating how businesses address complaints of discrimination, informally dubbed Alicia's Law. The bill called for mandatory reporting of bias-related incidents and penalties for companies that failed to uphold anti-discrimination policies. Alicia herself was invited to testify at a Senate hearing. "This isn't just about me," she told the committee. "It's about ensuring that dignity and respect aren't privileges. They're rights through at all." Alicia's story became more than just a cautionary tale, became a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Her courage to challenge the status quo didn't just spark change, it inspired a movement during a keynote speech at a civil rights summit. Alicia shared these parting words, "Every step forward starts with one person who refuses to step back. Don't wait for permission to stand up for what's right. Your voice is your power. Use it." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. But for Alicia, the journey wasn't about applause or accolades. It was about ensuring that the changes sparked by her stand were permanent. She knew the work wasn't over. It had only just begun. Months later, as Alicia sat in her office reviewing the first annual report from her campaign, she couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and determination. The numbers were staggering: over 10,000 incidents reported, thousands of people educated through workshops and policy changes enacted by several major corporations. But the real victory, she realized, wasn't in the numbers. It was in the quiet moments, like the messages she received from strangers thanking her for inspiring them to speak up. "Because of you, I found my voice," one email read. Those words stayed with her, reminding her why she had chosen to fight in the first place. In the end, Alicia's stand was about more than a seat on a plane. It was about reclaiming dignity, demanding accountability, and proving that change is possible when courage meets persistence. Alicia's story isn't just her. It belongs to everyone who has ever felt marginalized, overlooked, or silenced. It's a story about finding the courage to say no more and discovering the strength that comes when people rally behind a just cause. For those watching, this is your moment to reflect. How often do we witness injustice and remain silent? How often do we assume that someone else will speak up, only to realize that our silence allowed harm to persist? Alicia's stand reminds us that change begins with individuals who refuse to accept the status quo. There are tangible ways to carry this story forward. Start by educating yourself on the issues that underpin systemic discrimination, support organization, like specific advocacy group names that work tirelessly to combat inequality, and most importantly, use your voice. Whether it's in your workplace, community, or personal interactions, every step toward fairness makes a difference. If Elisha's story resonated with you, consider sharing it. Conversations spark awareness, and awareness leads to action. Follow her campaign, your voice, your power, and explore the tools it offers for standing up against bias and inequality. This isn't just about corporations or institutions, it's about all of us. Injustice doesn't thrive in isolation. It relies on indifference. When we challenge unfairness, we don't just protect ourselves, we create a ripple effect that strengthens our communities. As Elisha often says, courage is contagious. Her decision to hold her ground on that plane inspired countless others to find their own courage. Imagine what could happen if we all chose to act, to speak, and to stand. Let this story remind us of the power of persistence. Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but every voice matters, every action counts, and every stand brings us closer to a world where fairness and respect aren't privileges. They're givens. If you believe in this message, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Together, we can ensure that stories like Elisha's continue to inspire and ignite change.